Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for another Roxhill lockdown webinar. I'm Michael Davis, and as you know, we've been discussing the crisis and the lockdown with influential business journalists throughout the last few weeks. We've been talking to a number of the leading business editors of the national newspapers about their experience with the lockdown, how it's impacted their newspapers and the way that they interact with their readers. But I'm delighted to welcome this morning the editor of City AM. I'm sure he's well known to all of you, Christian May, who's been in the role for 5 years. Well, nearly 5 years now, Christian. Time flies, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I can't believe it. 5 years in, and it's been plenty of events and a bit of a roller coaster, certainly politically and in the markets. I didn't see this one coming, though, I have to say.
No, indeed. And we've been the reason for the bit of the preamble just there is that City AM has been impacted more than most papers by the crisis because of your unique model.
Oh yeah, there's no getting away from that. It's I wouldn't quite say it was overnight, but it was a very, very quick drying up of everything that really made City AM what it was. Now, I should say at the outset that we are quite confident that it's temporary, but I mean, temporary could be, frankly, the spring and the summer. We just don't know. So as a company, as a business, we have full plans in place to return, to come back to full strength, to come back to print. But for the time being, it's just not happening. So I think our last print edition was probably around the 23rd or 4th of March. And we did continue to produce the newspaper and host it online only after that for about a week, which was a good test actually of everyone's remote capabilities to put that together. And we did actually send it to print for the last 2 or 3 editions, by having put it together fully remotely as well. So that's quite an interesting experience. But actually, when it came time to make a decision about furloughing some staff, it was a very difficult decision. We basically had to find ourselves in a position where we couldn't produce even a digital version of the newspaper, and we slimmed right down. So it's been an extraordinarily complicated and difficult time, but not least because media organizations, whether you're involved in the production or the editorial side, they don't want to sit this one out. So nobody has gone on furlough willingly. Well, I suppose willingly they have, but not with any great enthusiasm, because this is and remains an extraordinary time and an extraordinary thing to cover.
Well, we'll go on to talk a little bit about the details of how you've reacted to the crisis in a moment, but that's great news to hear that you've got plans ready to go to get back on the streets. And we've had a huge response to this event. We've had hundreds and hundreds of people signing up from the City Comms community. I think that it is symptomatic of the role that City AM plays within our community, in the sense that it is the parish magazine, as it were. It must be reassuring to know that people are missing you from the streets and it's part of their daily lives.
Well, it's always nice to know one is missed, and certainly that's no less true professionally, is it? I think it sometimes does take a crisis like this to, through an enforced requirement, just to step back and think about where you are in the market and what you're doing as a business. And we won't be alone in confronting those challenges. But we write about our readers, and not every newspaper can say that. I think we have established a very good relationship with our readers and a good tone of voice and a good editorial product, I think. And so I was struck by the response to us announcing that we would have to temporarily pause print. I got, certainly publicly on social media, but perhaps more pertinently, private communications just came flooding in. And most people just wanted me to pass on the message to our staff or to our reporters. And we really did get a sense of that from very senior figures right the way down to business studies students. Just reminds us where we do sit. And that was nice to see, no doubt about it. And I know that we will be back, and our furloughed staff know that they will come back. But I have to say, along with everybody else, we will be confronting the unknown in that. And you touched on it right at the very beginning, that our entire model is based on commuter flows. And we just don't know where people are going to be. And we don't know if people are going to want to pick up a newspaper from someone, all those people in blue jackets. We don't know whether we might have to start distributing in towns and villages. If that's people are going to start working from home more, which I suspect, I'm sure they will, we'll have to adapt to that. But as a company, we went into this crisis in pretty good shape, because we just spent the last 3 or 4 years paying down debt and getting into a really clean position. This was going to be the year where we really made some money and then invested some money. Now that's going to take a different shape, but at least we've gone into it in good health.
Well, we look forward to the good news that you're coming back, but I suspect it will also be good news for us, as we'll be leading more normal lives. But as you pointed out, then you've had to pivot your business to cope with the crisis. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the moment and the role that the website's now playing in your output.
Well, in peacetime, I had 32 or 33 members of my editorial staff, and that included the production and design desk, the night team, the people who finally click print. It included the various lifestyle, sport, features desks, all sorts of very talented people. And we have had to furlough about 2/3 because if we're not producing a newspaper, there's a core number of the team whose job is purely associated with the production of that product, and that's not happening. And also purely from a financial perspective and that kind of emergency response, that commercial response, we have furloughed a large number of people. What we've done is retain 10 core journalists. They're all working remotely. I obviously have a digital editor, Joe, who's still working, and Andy, my deputy. So we 3 are the editorial presence, and then there's 7 news reporters who are still working, and they're on the rota and they're doing a good job. The website, I'm sure, in keeping with other news organisations, is seeing the most extraordinary demand: 2 to 3 million people a week coming to cityam.com. So we have to service that demand, of course, and there is a commercial aspect to the digital operation. Of course, there is. It's not as big as the revenue that comes from print advertising, so we miss that, and we need it back. I think we will be okay when we do return to print. We have such a specialised and such an attractive readership that when we say to the ad market, we're back, I'm quite confident the ad market will say good, but we'll have to test that theory when the time comes. So we're very much online only at the moment, and we're not doing sport, we're not really doing lifestyle, a few pieces coming in from contributors, and we are doing comment and features, of course. My deputy Andy is overseeing a lot of that, so we're taking submissions from people writing about how they're responding to this crisis, and other things, of course, because the world goes on. Certainly in our world it does. And I've also launched the daily City AM podcast, which was something that I thought about doing for at least 2 years, and it's taken this crisis to sort of have the commercial imperative, because we found a sponsor for it and there's a good chunk of money behind it now, and B, I have the time to sit here at 5 o'clock every afternoon and chat to someone interesting, and we have someone who puts that together and puts it up online for us in the morning, so that's doing very well. Life is different, but at the same time, there's huge demand, and our political reporter is very busy. He's often asking questions in the Downing Street briefings, and our other reporters still covering all the main areas of interest to us and to our readers.
We're going to go and talk a little bit more about the daily life in City AM in a second, but just a reminder to those of you who've joined us today, we've got a chat room on the right, as you'll see. Please let us know what you think about City AM, about the lockdown, but also it's an opportunity for you guys to ask us some questions. We'll try and sew those into the conversation and pick some of them up at the end. Anyway, you know how it works. We'll leave you to it. But Christian, could you just talk us through how things have changed on a sort of day-to-day sort of biorhythms of City AM? How are you still holding the same sort of editorial conferences when the decision's made? What type of material are you trying to get up onto the website? how what's working, what isn't, what are the timings. There's quite a lot to get your teeth into there, but give us an overview of a day in lockdown for Christian May.
Well, you mentioned the word rhythm, which is really interesting because I'd so often got used to explaining to people in conversations like this or other conversations that the rhythm of a daily print newspaper is like nothing else, and you can absolutely set your body clock by it. And at midnight on Monday, when you finally kind of look at the last page, you slump into bed, and in the morning you wake up and you're going to do it all over again. And that's quite exhilarating. It also completely defines your life and my life, my working life, my family life. And all of those rhythms have been disrupted, as they have been for all of us, and there's no doubt about that. My wife and I actually escaped London before the lockdown, so we're not breaking any laws here, but we're down in Devon now. About a week before the lockdown. My wife is very pregnant, certainly very pregnant now. She was pretty pregnant then when we left London. And for various reasons that I won't bore you with, we were living in a very, very small flat. We were having some work done on the house. And we were living in a very small flat. We've got a 3-year-old already. And we thought, if there's a lockdown coming, this is not the place to spend it. So we're lucky, and we do remember that every day, that we were able to come down to a house that the family have here in Devon. And we've been here now for more than 2 months. My wife is also working full time, so we divide up our day doing our own work and looking after our son. And we sort of pass on the stairs and catch up at the end of the day. So we're busy in that sense. But from City AM's perspective, it is, some things remain the same and some things are very different. The rhythms that governed print life are not there anymore. But the digital world, it's no slower. And so we still have reporters on shift starting at 7 in the morning. And we have a reporter who finishes his shift at about 11 o'clock at night. So we're still there as much as we possibly can be. From a news perspective, obviously we have a reporter in the lobby in Westminster who's as busy as all the other political reporters. We have our markets and economics reporter who's never been busier. As you can imagine, the most extraordinary economic consequences from policy and from central banks to what's going on in the world. Not to mention just what's happening in the markets, of course. So that's a very busy patch. But other than that, we still have a real interest in our core patches. So whether that's tech or media or marketing or banking, of course, and also just an eye on how businesses are doing, because there are always going to be businesses for whom this is actually a great opportunity, and we're interested in those as much as we're interested in how individual businesses, but also the entire working apparatus of London is changing and will change. And that's an extraordinary thing to sort of get one's head around, actually. The commuter flows, the way offices will look, the way the streets will feel. Think of the hospitality sector that makes London absolutely hum, and think of the challenges they're facing. So we're absolutely no shortage of news, and we're busy from dawn till, well, shortly before the following dawn, frankly. So we have an appetite for news. We have an appetite. We have to have quite a tight filter. We have to set the bar quite high as to what we can afford to put a reporter on. We just don't have the resources to pick up everything that looks interesting. But those filters are in place. There is an appetite for news, for interesting comments, for reactions, and also for my podcast, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about.
Yeah. So how are you? When a decision's made about what goes on the website every day, when you got to certain times that you're trying to hit?
Well, I mean, early doors is still the same as it would be in a normal day. So, in a normal day, I would come into work at about 10 o'clock in the morning, which sounds quite civilized, but I'll still be there 12 hours later. And I start to think very much about the newspaper. But by that time, reporters have been on duty from 6:30, 7 in the morning, doing all the market open stories, company results stories, etc. That's still happening. And then there's a editorial call around 11 o'clock in the morning where people start to talk a little bit more about what else they're going to do in the day or what they're working on, an update on some of the longer form pieces that they're working on. And then the editorial team that remains, which is me and my deputy plus Joe Curtis, the digital editor, we're just in touch throughout the day, just on WhatsApp, really. What are we seeing? What's coming on? Who's doing this? Are we on top of that? So that's kind of juggled, frankly, throughout the day. things with a bit of lead-in time are quite welcome at the moment. People who are putting out quite hefty research or quite interesting pieces of work. It's good for us to know 2 or 3 days in advance that's coming, and it's quite a relief at times to know that you've got something ahead of time. We'll respect your embargoes, of course, but it's useful. We'll get a better show out of it if I can say to someone, look, give us 48 hours to look at this, whereas normally we might have just picked it up over the course of a couple of hours. I've got to find the right person and find time in their day to look at it. But so, yeah, I mean, some things are going to break. Breaking news is obviously still the lifeblood of a digital news operation. But also, of course, we'd like to have a bit of advance notice on things that are going to be of interest, bit of research, bit of data, whatever it might be, to get our teeth into it and to do it in a good way.
Now, there was enough on your agenda before the crisis struck. This was going to be a big year for the city, working out how it was going to be impacted by Brexit. So presumably, covering that nexus between politics and finance is going to be crucial for your approach and coverage over coming months.
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, name me a sector of the British economy that has not gone to the government for help or received help from the government or wishes it had help from the government. This is an entirely political story. I mean, there's so many stories and themes in normal life that bring politics and economics and business together, which is really fascinating. It's what I've always liked to be. But none, not even Brexit, have brought them together in the same way as this. I mean, the British government, we, the taxpayers, are now paying for the wages of nearly 8 million people to the tune of £15 billion a month. Absolutely extraordinary. The loan scheme that the government have implemented to try and help banks get money out the door to businesses that need it. I mean, I think we've been, I would say humbly as I can, that I think we've been excellent on that issue, on the CBIL issue, coronavirus business interruption loans. We have really, I think, led a lot of the coverage and a lot of the pressure identifying the problems with that scheme. And that's been extremely gratifying, and I know that we have directly led to changes in the Treasury and in the way that scheme is applied, and there's more to do on that. And I also know from my own inbox, I get the most heartbreaking emails coming through from businesses across the country trying to apply for loans, can't get them, think they've got 2 or 3 weeks left to live until they go under. And I find myself at times actually just helping people with their own business crisis, and the sort of thoughts about writing it up or referring to it as secondary. So we've found ourselves being in quite an extraordinary play, very intimate relationship with the businesses that we would normally write about, reasonably detached.
No, interesting, and that the City AM suddenly has far broader reference than the square mile, but focusing in on the city's own issues, what do you think is going to play big over the next 12 months?
Well, undoubtedly, one of the biggest stories coming is the way people work. And, that has all sorts of interesting feature stories in it and, fascinating conversations to be had about the way people work. It also has a very sharp-edged economic and financial story to it. Land Securities, for example, one of the biggest commercial landlords in the country, they only have 10% of their property portfolio occupied at the moment in offices. I mean, that's extraordinary. And they have no confidence, and the markets have no confidence that that's going to just rebound anytime soon. And then you can hear it from the horse's mouth also. Jez Staley at Barclays, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, and others at Deutsche Bank and other big occupants of square mile territory, just saying they're not going to come back in the way they were. I was speaking to the chief executive of a law firm who pays hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds monthly for a vast office portfolio in the city. And he said he's just not going to do it anymore because he doesn't need to, because they found that with everybody working remotely, they haven't suffered a single drop in output. So why would he continue to spend millions of pounds a year on a property portfolio that he doesn't need? Now, people will still come to work. There will be offices. London will be busy again one day, but it will be different. Some people will be in, some people will be out. And my wife is doing a huge amount of work in this space. She's self-employed. She's a historian by profession, but for the last 2 years, she's been focusing on the future of work and different generations and the different way different generations have the different attitude towards work. And she's contributed to a lot of work and research in that field. And she said to me the other day that, people had to really make the case to get 1 day a week working at home, to help with childcare, whether you're mum or a dad. And that conversation is just not going to be difficult to have anymore. I mean, that has just changed. You don't have to make that case anymore. Even 2 weeks paternity leave, it feels inadequate now, and that is something on my mind. And so there will be two massive forces that will bring about that change in the way the city and Canary Wharf and other parts of the country look and feel in terms of professional footprints. And one is from the top, serious big companies with massive portfolios of property confronting a cost crunch and thinking we need to save money and we need to shrink that. And then from the bottom up, you'll have people saying, I want to carry on working flexibly, or I want to carry on working 3 days a week from home. And together, those two forces are going to have a huge impact on the commercial property market, and also just the way we all think about work. And that's going to be a huge story for a long time ahead.
Do you think it raises an existential crisis for the city, or does it need to be reconfigured in people's, the concept of the city needs to be reconfigured in another way?
I don't want to get too far ahead of myself in saying that, everything is going to change dramatically and forever. Because actually, human beings have a remarkable capacity to snap back into the way things were. And that will be determined by the extent to which and the timings of which that becomes possible again. So people will want to come to work, I would hope, certainly from our model. And there are great benefits to doing so. And let's not forget that, for a lot of people, it's essential. You can't work from home, fine. But the property investors and the landlords I talk to, they're pretty worried, but actually they also recognize that it's just going to trigger a change. It'll trigger a change in the commercials and the economics of that space. But, some people who couldn't afford a bit of city retail space or city office space might be able to down the line. That's going to change things. But offices are going to change in quite a profound way. I mean, so much of the big places were geared towards the social part of work, keeping you in the office, very social parts of the office space, which is probably just going to be off limits for another year. I was speaking to the chief executive of a major group in the city who said they're anticipating some form of distancing requirements for the next 18 months in the way their building works. And so that's going to make a change. So there will be those that are hit commercially by this. There will also be those for whom it presents a commercial opportunity to come into London, to come into the city. And so there's always going to be that balance.
Isabel at St. Bride's raises an interesting point. Is it going to change the way you run a newspaper?
Yeah, I suspect it will. We will have reporters on different shifts when we come back to printing the newspaper. If reporters say to me, I'd like to do my 7 a.m. to midday shift at home and then come in to finish my shift up till 4 o'clock in the office, I would say, of course you can. There will always be a core number of people for whom putting the paper together is best done in a conversational environment in the office. But as I say, we had a brief experiment of putting the entire newspaper together, editing it, and sending it to print remotely. And that's good to know that we can do that. For example, if our building burnt down, I'm not sure we'd want to be in a habit of doing that forevermore, because like a lot of people, I'm sure, watching this, there's great advantage to being in the room and having conversations. And, that is not something that can be easily replicated. So we will, I'm sure, do things differently. But at the same time, I know we're all quite keen to get back to doing what we were doing before.
Now, time is marching on, and I'd just like to end with a bit of a discussion about some of the communication challenges that have been raised by the crisis. Do you think the city's and city institutions are having a good comms crisis?
Gosh, well, I'd say it's a mixed bag. I think people in the comms profession will recognise just as much as those of us on the other side of the fence that life goes on. That there's the huge activity still in key sectors. The markets are still, the capital markets in the UK are still providing vast amounts of money to many businesses all across the country. People are launching businesses, And so the communications kind of goes around all of that. I haven't noticed any deterioration in it. I think in the early stages of this, there are some companies, some individuals who made a few missteps in the way they thought they could interact with the world around them at this extraordinary time. But I think on the whole, I haven't noticed any kind of deterioration in the way people are talking to us and in my ability to access the people I want to talk to. So I think it's it's reminded us actually that effective communications at a time of great uncertainty and change are immensely important. And I would expect that people watching this feel that and recognize that and have probably responded to that because it is very important. Important for investors, important for customers, clients, future customers, future investors. People still need to be aware of what's going on around them. And so whatever your audience, whether you're B2B or you're talking to me or you're talking to people online or talking internally to your own team, it's phenomenally important to have good communications. And I think actually most places and institutions, be that the Bank of England or the FCA or even individual companies, small and large, most of the time I think they've been doing a pretty good job during this crisis.
No, I'm a big believer that good communications is a sign of good process, and as much as anything, thought process. And it's when you see muddled communications that often you can get concerned about what is leading to that. And I think plenty of people have made the same conclusion after the missteps from number 10 last week. But on a more practical basis, and we've got a lot of people who have been asking these sorts of questions on the right, should people be approaching you and your colleagues in the same way as before, pitching the same stories? What's the best way to flag things up to you at the moment?
Yes, as I mentioned, it's good to get a bit of advance notice on things that we have to decide to put somebody on, and also not to be disheartened if we just say it's not one for us or we can't do it, because we are slimmed down and we have to filter out things that in the past I might have had 20 people I could talk to about picking up a good idea that's come in, and now I've got effectively 8. So there's going to be that filter that I have to contend with. But you should be emailing news@cityam.com. Joe Curtis is the earliest one on shift, joe.curtis@cityam.com. I'm sure he'll thank me for giving out that, but I'm sure you all know these email addresses anyway. And similarly, my deputy Andy Sylvester, and I'm not averse to receiving emails either, but it tends to take me a while to get through them all. So we might feel like we're all a bit distant or all a bit hidden away, but we are still here, and we are still working, and we are still looking to communicate and looking to hear for good ideas. We will be the first people we bring back, probably from June, will be somebody on our comment and features desk. So June onwards will be a good time to start reconnecting with those pitches. And I think that will be a welcome development.
And as you said, Andy's holding the fort on that front at the moment.
At the moment, Andy Sylvester is kind of managing and filtering and then posting most of the comment and feature ideas that come through. But we will bring somebody from the comment team back to pick that up from probably from June. But we'll make an announcement on that, so you won't miss it. And from my perspective, I've committed to doing a bloody daily podcast, and I'm enjoying it. But I look through and I think, oh God, I haven't got anybody for the 4th of June. Or I haven't got anybody for the 8th of June. I am actually now pretty booked up till about the 10th of June. But I am going to be continuing this and looking for guests. So I would invite you to consider yourselves or your colleagues or clients for pitching as guests on my show. But I would also just gently say that I would set quite a high bar as to who comes on, either high bar in the sense that they're doing something that is so unique that I'm just intrigued, or that they are a very senior individual. And so just with that in mind, I would welcome all pitches for guests on the show. The podcast's doing really well, and that's great because actually we've got a good sponsor behind it now, and I think we'll continue that, well beyond this crisis.
No, I discovered it this morning, and I'm already a fan and have signed up. But like so many things, pitching anything, the best way to do it is to get a real grip of what the theme and the content is. So I encourage everybody else to sign up to, well, the name again is?
The City View.
The City View, and you'll find it on any podcast app. Sign up, listen in, and apart from anything else, it's very good. Finally, you mentioned, yes, you're looking to start bringing back maybe some of the other sections of the paper online. Any plans for the lifestyle part, or is that still?
Well, of course, whilst our 3 fantastic life and style reporters are furloughed, we still have the capacity to take that content and find the right person, I suppose, and host it online. So, we're still quite open to that. And just because the 3 people who deal with that on a daily basis are not working at the moment, though they will be again, it doesn't mean that we have lost appetite for that kind of content. And actually, if there are some innovative approaches, particularly, dare I risk saying, as lockdown eases, and we're still in this lovely summer months, if people have got ideas about what could be achieved for a bit of R&R, then we'd be all ears. Personally, I'd be all ears. So yeah, I mean, still bear with us. There's not as many people around, not as many inboxes being read, but we are still here.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Christian. That's been a most informative half hour, but most of all, it's been really encouraging. So glad to hear you sound so positive about the future, and we really look forward to City AM coming back into our lives in the physical presence. But in the meantime, we're going to enjoy it online. All the best to you and your family. When's the latest May edition expected?
Baby coming in about 5 or 6 weeks. So I mean, that's going to be wonderful. And let me just say also, by the way,
because in the meantime,
I haven't kept a close eye on the text on the right. But if anybody wants to email me the question that they did post there, I'll be glad to answer it. So I'm sorry we didn't get through them all, but if you wanted to send me an email, I'm very happy to have a conversation. Well,
we're seeing your notes coming through at the moment, and glad it's all gone down well, and that you appreciate Christian's contribution today. There was one note I saw that we didn't address. We do have a list of all the fellow journalists registered in Roxhill, so do look on that. If you don't have access to Roxhill, then let me know. Christian, all the best. Thank you very much. Great you're keeping your chin up, and we look forward to everybody else joining us in the not too distant future. We will be having the Oliver Shah session that I'm afraid we had the Gremlins get involved with yesterday, rescheduled, and I'm delighted.
Man. Former City AM.
Well, that's
most of them are.
Well, the people who are most interested in the conversation we're having today are the other business editors on Fleet Street, because they're reliant on you, Christian, for their staff. Let's just finish on that. That's an interesting point. Is how do you view that continual poaching by Fleet Street of your team?
I long ago accepted that it is far better than the opposite. If nobody thought to hire from my team, then clearly we'd be doing something wrong. And as it happened, I mean, I've got of the news reporters in good peacetime, about 12 of them, in addition to all the other editorial staff. But of the news team journalists, about 12 of them at any one time. In my 5 years, I've probably hired 60 odd. I mean, the turnover is quite intense. And whenever they go, I simply give them a bottle of champagne and say, well done, because that's the way life is, and good on them. And then I look for the next wave of young talent. But I'm very proud of I mean, look at the people who are around across the business pages now, whose first job was City AM and with me. People like Ollie Gill at The Telegraph.
Yeah.
Look at what people like Jim Waterson's doing at The Guardian. Look at
David Crowe, you were watching a little bit before.
Kate McCann at Sky, and everybody just going off to do great things. So good on them.
Exactly. Excellent. Christian, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And we'll see you for Ollie Shah. And the other one we've got is Patrick Jenkins, Deputy Editor of the Financial Times, joining us soon as well.
Brilliant.
Have a good day, Christian.
Thank you. Bye-bye.